What's up, ladies and gentlemen? This is Binks. I hope you all had a nice holiday. As for me, I was snowed in for about a week. Here, check out what my neighborhood looks like. But it's not all bad. That gave me plenty of time to catch up on the Star Wars Jedi Survivor news that was dropping recently after the gameplay reveal. In the days after the gameplay reveal trailer, star Cameron Monaghan and game director Stig Asmussen have given a couple interviews that shed some new light on gameplay and details for Jedi Survivor, so I want to go over those interviews and talk a little bit about some of the implications here. But before we get to the interviews, in my last video we did a bit of a deep dive on the gameplay reveal trailer, and a few of you spotted some things that I missed and told me about them. First, here in this canyon settlement, Sergeant Oddball commented that the small text below Dendra's might say Antiquities, and while really this text is still too small and fuzzy for me to make it out with any certainty, I did some pixel peeping and it does look like it could say Antiquities. So maybe Dendra is the name of the proprietor and it's an antique shop of some sort. Winter Follows Spring suggested that the Bacta-Tank guy here is wearing High Republic era robes in this shot from later in the trailer. I have to confess here, I don't know much about the High Republic era. I haven't read any of the books or the comics, and I know I need to get to it. So you guys are probably going to know better than me on this. Kemper Crowley suggested that this big guy could be a Gendai, which is a skeletonless species that wears heavy armor to give themselves a rigid humanoid structure, and they're notorious for being almost impossible to kill. In Legends, the bounty hunter Dirge was a member of this species, though I don't think that's explicitly been stated in the new canon. He definitely looks similar to other depictions of Gendai, although not identical, so this definitely could be possible. And a few of you have pointed out correctly that these Dark Troopers that I pointed out in the trailer aren't actually Dark Troopers at all, but DT series sentry droids, which have been seen in the Bad Batch and Star Wars Rebels. And yeah, that's my bad. I think I saw the black armor and the helmet pieces and got overexcited. Although I will say, given the resemblance that they bear to what eventually become Dark Troopers, and the fact that their name is a DT series droid, which would be a pretty major coincidence, I can't help but wonder if these might be some sort of precursor to the Dark Trooper program that produces the troops we've seen before. Like I said in my last video, this is around the time when Phase 1 Dark Troopers should start coming out, if not a little bit later. And now on to the meat of the video. Recently, Cameron Monaghan, who plays Cal Kestis, and the game director of Fallen Order and Survivor, Stig Asmussen, have both given interviews that shed new light on details about Jedi Survivor's gameplay, level design, and scope. The Cameron Monaghan interview on StarWars.com talks a lot about Cameron's personal experiences playing Cal and makes for a pretty interesting read, even apart from the hints that he drops about the game's story. I definitely recommend that you check it out if you're interested. The link to it is in the description. Now, obviously, the star of the game isn't going to be dropping spoilers in an interview with StarWars.com, so you're safe from that here. But he does set the stage for the game's story in a way, so if you're trying to avoid anything story-related, skip ahead to the timestamp on screen. So, speaking about the trailer, Monaghan says that this trailer is a small preview of the game, hinting at much more that hasn't yet been shown, and gives a little insight into the jumping off point of the story, and hints at some friction between Cal and Cere Junda. He says, frankly, Cere and Cal have different ideas of how to deal with imperialism and the Empire. In the first game, it was about finding family and what it means to create a family. With this story, a lot of it is to do with what happens when there's stress on a family. This is going to be an emotional roller coaster for people, he says. I think that you'd have to be made of stone for it to not hit you in the heart. Great, I can't wait to choke back tears while I play it on stream. That'll be fun. Stig Asmussen's interview with Game Informer is much more gameplay focused, and he gives a few very interesting details that I had theorized about in my last video. The first thing that he confirms is that there are 5 fully realized stances in the game. A lot of it depends on the enemy that you're coming across. It's advantageous to use certain types of stances against certain types of enemies, and it's up to the player to figure that out. It requires the player to break down the enemies and figure out what the best weapon of choice is. He goes on to elaborate somewhat on the few of the playstyles. There's a dedicated dual-wielding option, and a separate stance we've yet to see where Cal wields his lightsaber and a blaster simultaneously, adding a new range dynamic to his moveset. He confirms that the crossguard-style lightsaber is part of a new heavy stance, and the final 2 stances are most likely, obviously, the basic single saber and the double-bladed lightsaber. So this basically confirms what I assumed and then some. So these 4 distinct combat styles shown off in the trailer, the single blade, the double blade, dual wielding, and the heavy crossguard saber, are 4 unique stances with timing and combo differences, strengths and weaknesses, and in addition there's a 5th stance that uses a blaster and a lightsaber. I'd really like to see some gameplay footage soon that features the stance with the blaster and the lightsaber, if only so that we can get an idea of how it's going to play, what it's going to look like, or what its usefulness is going to be. We've seen limited footage of the other 4 styles, but we could kind of make assumptions about them even if we hadn't, based on what we've seen in other Star Wars media and Fallen Order. But a Jedi using a lightsaber and a blaster at the same time? We haven't seen that very much. Ezra Bridger had his combo saber in Rebels, but it's not really the same. Dual-wielding a lightsaber and a blaster is completely new, and that's very interesting. But in the absence of any gameplay or details, I'm left to make some assumptions about this style and how it might work, filling in the gaps that the other 4 styles leave. The single saber style I expect to be a very balanced option, not dealing a ton of damage, not giving you any defensive bonus, but not being terrible at any one thing, and good enough for just about any situation if you want to stick with it. Basically, this is what we had in Fallen Order. The basic combat style I don't expect to change. The double-bladed lightsaber in Fallen Order was very useful for deflecting extended salvos of laser blasts, and I expect that usefulness to continue. It's also very good against wildlife-type enemies, and it's good for crowd control, despite dealing slightly less damage per strike than the single blade. A good option when you're up against a large group, but one which requires some space to use effectively. The crossguard style, according to Stig, is a heavier stance. It's a much more confident approach. It's weighty, it's beefy. But you have to be very measured on how you use it because the timing windows are longer with the blade. This matches what we saw at the tail end of the gameplay trailer. Each swing takes significantly longer than a normal single saber attack, and we get the sense that this is a heavier hitting combat style. So the most obvious analog would be to a two-handed weapon in other action combat games. You'll do much more damage per hit, but you leave yourself very vulnerable while you wind up and in your recovery frames. With regard to the dual wield style, I still really expect this to be a glass cannon stance. Very high damage, relentless attacks that wear down enemies very quickly, but I think that using it will either significantly diminish your posture, or will give you some sort of significant defensive debuff that balances its effectiveness and high damage with very high risk, and will make you think twice about using it at all times. As for the lightsaber combined with the blaster, I expect this to be a ranged-focused build centered around the blaster, using the lightsaber to block ranged attacks or intermittently to use in melee. It's such a unique sounding stance that I'm not sure how else it might be utilized. The lightsaber throw in Fallen Order was basically Cal's only range damage option, and the fact that it used force made it pretty bad and rarely used. The blaster could potentially fix that problem, giving Cal a range damage option, but it would have to be balanced so that you couldn't just bravely run away and then shoot stuff for the entire fight. One possibility that might be interesting is, since both of your hands are occupied while you're dual wielding either 2 lightsabers or a lightsaber and a blaster, that it might make your force abilities unavailable while you're using either of these 2 stances, making you entirely focused on your weapons and completely dependent with interacting with that side of the combat. If you have some thoughts about how the blaster stance might work in gameplay, or if you think I might be wrong about any of the others, let me know in the comment section. Stig also shed some light on Bode Akuna, the new character to the game being played by Nosher Dalal. Beyond story considerations, he tells us Bode plays a role as a buddy AI character who aids in both combat and traversal. So that confirms that Bode Akuna is, in fact, a combat companion, and the way Stig describes his role makes him sound somewhat analogous to Atreus in the God of War games. He's useful in combat, dealing a lot of your damage if you utilize him effectively, used as a narrative device and as a puzzle-solving and exploration device, helping you solve puzzles you'd be unable to alone, and reach areas that would be inaccessible to you otherwise. Whether he's as fleshed out as Atreus in the God of War games, that is, whether he has his own skill tree or anything like that, we're not given any details, but I'm excited to see more about how this is going to work in the coming months. I'm also excited to see if they're going to integrate any other combat companions into the game, like other characters we've already met or new characters that we haven't met yet. Beyond this, he also gives us some perspective on the level design and non-combat gameplay, mentioning that Jedi Survivor embraces several new traversal mechanics, such as the grapple and the mid-air dash that we saw in the trailer, allowing for greater flexibility and exploration. It's much wider of a Metroidvania approach, he says. Cal can cross huge gaps by chaining several types of skills together, but it's also about how we approach these mounts and how they're used to negotiate and dominate the world. This is good news to me. One of my major gripes about the abilities in Fallen Order is that none of them really fundamentally transform the way that you traverse the world in the way other abilities in other Metroidvania-style games do. Things like the bash in Ori games or the screw attack in Metroid fundamentally alter traversal and combat from the moment that you get them, and Fallen Order really has no analog to that. The level design also never evolved to challenge you to chain abilities together, but since the game director is specifically mentioning that here, hopefully that means the level design in Survivor will be a step above Fallen Order in terms of how it forces players to engage with it. This also seemingly confirms that the mounts we see in the gameplay trailer are a continuous aspect of traversal around the world rather than a one-off set piece. The limits of using mounts to traverse the world and solve puzzles is only limited by the imagination of the team designing the mounts that Cal has access to, so I'm very excited to see what they have up their sleeves. I'm sure there'll be several creature mounts that we haven't seen yet, and perhaps the return of a speeder bike, which is a segment that was planned for Fallen Order but eventually cut. That's all the Star Wars news I have for you today, but I do have one other thing to talk to you about. A few of you have asked if I had a Discord server, which I didn't. I never anticipated needing one. But a few of you have asked me to make one anyway, so I went ahead and did that. If you'd like to join and talk about Star Wars, speedrunning, hang out for occasional movie nights, or just get daily pictures of my cats, the link to that server is in the description, along with links to my Twitter, where you can follow me for the hottest of Star Wars and video gaming takes, and my Twitch, where you can find me speedrunning or sometimes playing casual games. I'm actually live right now. I'll be speedrunning Knights of the Old Republic, all quests, no major glitches when this video goes live. So if you're watching right after the video goes live, come over and say hi. But that's it for me, everyone. Please like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, and let me know what you think about the Stig Asmussen and Cameron Monaghan interviews in the comments below. Goodbye, my friends, and may the Force be with you.